Hey everybody, welcome to the GMG review. Today we're taking a look at some 3D printed models from onlygames.ca, which is a subsidiary of My Mini Factory. And these were sent as complimentary review copies for me to check out. Basically, how far has on-demand 3D printing come? And with My Mini Factory being one of the most accessible websites to either download STLs or also to have models printed and shipped to you as like a traditional blister pack, which is what these are. They wanted to show off what they can do now, and so they asked me if I would check them out. Now, I own a 3D printer. I own a Mars Elegoo 3, and I've used it to print everything from my Steel Rift minis to lots of knuckle bones and whatchamacallit, other like Patreon STLs, which I've got some here. To use in my games, and I've gotten fairly familiar with like the function of 3D printing. I am kind of a Luddite still, so I don't have the best like technical spec knowledge, but I do know a lot about miniatures and the difference between a good cast and a bad cast, and so I agreed to click these open and get ready to check them out for you. These Only Games minis are I've not opened them yet. They come without bases, which I thought was interesting, although some have them printed on, and are basically pre-cleaned, pre-washed, and ready to go. They've been printed in, it looks like a standard Elegoo style resin, and the curing on them is pretty good. There's a little bit of shine here on his belly, but apart from that, most of the contact points of the print look like they have already been cleaned off. There's a few on his feet here that are a little bit bumpy, which I'm gonna just scrape just to see how the resin feels. But they came off just fine. And some attention to detail has been done to make sure this was clean out of the gate. So this is an undead direwolf that was printed and sent to me by them. I see 0 print lines on it. Obviously it's been done with a quality resin printer. And yeah, and as far as like the supports, I don't see really any support like trauma, I guess is the word I would use, except for the bottom of the feet. So it hasn't been over supported. You can see I add 1 million supports to my own because I'm bad at printing and I want them to come out just fine. And what I'm talking about with support bits is like on some of my miniatures, because I add so many supports, you can see these little like nubs that I've had to go on and scrape off. The curing is good, there's no shiny bits, and the washing looks good too on this direwolf. So there's number 1. Now number 2, and this is actually gonna be fairly telling because it doesn't have, one of the hardest things to print attached to a miniature I've found and have look good is bases. Because doing anything that needs to be like perfectly machined and flat tends to be a bit harder to do. So this model is pre-based. And I imagine support, so yeah, you can see some support marks here on the bottom of the blades on this, because they are definitely needing to be supported during the print. They do scrape off pretty well, but it is a little bit nubby, I would say, but not too bad. The horns look good. Again, a bit of a support on the bottom of the horn there. So they haven't been cleaned perfectly. The one thing I will say is that is you are most likely to break a miniature, by like in my experience, a 3D printed one, when you are removing the supports, because I will snap pieces of this guy off while I clean them by accident by just cutting too hard. And so the quality of the resin becomes really important. Now there's a textured base on here. It's got little spikes and skulls. There's a few undercuts, but they're nicely printed. And overall, it looks like all of his details came out just fine. There is one horn here that looks like it may have been broken off, but that also might be intentional, that it's just like a broken horn, so I'm not 100% sure with that. Again, not quite as support clean as this wolf was. He's got a few more points of support that look like they haven't been cleaned off, but I can kind of understand with this miniature because this miniature is covered in spikes. I wouldn't, if I was like doing factory work cleaning these, I wouldn't be sure what was intentional or not. So I'm gonna give this guy a little bit more of a, not a pass, but like, it's kind of more understandable you might need to clean some of this by hand because I wouldn't know what needed to come off and what wouldn't. There are a few things like there's some nubs in the kern of the hole, or the curve of the horn here, that are not quite cleaned. You get the name Lord of the Print on the bottom here, and he's kind of like a Chaos Warrior. Overall, I would say it's fairly clean, no more or less flash than you would have on like a metal or resin poured miniature. And nothing that you can't, if you're careful, take off. I will say that the swords have just enough flex, I would say, to be safe. Like if you bump into it, it's not gonna just snap. Let's give it the old flick test. Yeah, flick test. There we go. Oh, there it goes. I had to pretty aggressively flick that to break it, but that's gonna stand up to like wear and tear of just like walking onto it. So I'm not gonna blame that for breaking because I was getting pretty aggressive there at the end with the flick test. It didn't just immediately snap, which some like stiffer resins will. Like I don't think I could flick this. There it goes. Two for that to have it come off. And then last but not least, let's look at this undead skeleton. It was the third and final model I was sent to review and check out. And I apologize, I don't know, like I couldn't search through my mini factory and discover who the individual sculptors were for these, but I think if you check out the one-page rule stuff, I think they're all associated with one-page rules at some point, because this guy's like a Khemri dude, this is like obviously a Chaos Warrior. I think if you search through their section in Only Games, you'll probably find what you're looking for. This one of the three is the only one I can see print lines on, which is interesting. I can see them on his cape. You probably can't, but I can actually see some print lines in here. I couldn't see them at all on this guy. He was perfectly smooth. And it looks like the resin's slightly different on this. This almost looks a little more like Cyocast resin. These two look the same versus this one's a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? It has a tooth to it, like a certain amount of graininess, I think, which is slightly different. Overall though, casting quality looks good. The face looks relatively fine, not perfect, but fine. And far less supports on this guy. Again, just the bottom of the feet. His sword even is cleaner than that Chaos Warrior sword, like vent-wise, which I think is interesting. He's got some undercuts, which is nice, the bonus of 3D printing. And even in those undercuts, I don't see any support. So this print was really nicely done, despite maybe being at a slightly less, or slightly lower setting than the other ones, or on a different printer. But yeah, overall, almost no cleaning required on him at all. There's like no vents. So, and again, let's just flick test this. Yeah, it's a bit softer resin. You can tell, because it's just bending. It's not going anywhere. Yeah, so I think that's the difference in the resin, whatever this resin is. It's a slightly different mix, slightly softer, which means it has that slight tooth to it, versus the harder resin over here that's got a little more snap to it. But yeah, good quality cast, and if this came out of the box, I'd just base it and be ready to rock and roll. It's a little Tomb King. Oh, sorry, Tomb Lord. Legally distinct Tomb Lord from Only Games. Now, Only Games hooked up my patrons with a discount code, so if you want to get a discount on orders from Only Games, if you want to order your own printed miniatures or STLs, you can grab it through my Patreon. I'll link it in the video description. Overall, what I would say is there's no difference. Like, there's not really functionally a difference between buying these 3D printed miniatures printed for you or buying like a Cyocast mini from Infinity or a resin model from Privateer Press or even a Forge World resin miniature. They're the same brittleness. The casting detail is just as good. This technology has really leveled the playing field as far as being able to get good quality casts. And the thing I can comment on is they've made some effort to get these to you clean. They're not coming covered in supports. They've done, I'd say, a reasonable amount of due diligence to make them clean when they arrive to you. And they're probably cleaner than a lot of casts you're going to get in traditional metal and some other mediums. So I'd be happy to put these on the table. I'm definitely going to paint this wolf. I don't know what I'm going to do with these two guys, but they might see a game table sometime soon. I'll have to fix this guy's sword because I was aggressive with it, but that's part of reviewing things is you guys need to see me do it. So I was going to flick this until it broke no matter what. One of these guys was breaking because I was going to do them all just as much. I could flick his tail, but it's not going anywhere. Yeah, it's not bending at all. And thanks to Only Games to send this along, because I think that this is like a legitimate production methodology that's going to become more and more big in the years to come that you guys need to see get reviewed. So there it is. They're just miniatures. It feels like it probably feels like it to certain age demographics that are used to working in the old traditional sort of like mediums of like receiving miniatures, like it's like some new scary technology. But ordering from my manufacturer Only Games and getting them printing them, it's going to be really no different quality wise than probably buying a box set off your wall at your local store. And you'll get to pick exactly the miniatures you want and get them printed and shipped to you. So there's no stock issues, right? They just make it and send it to you, which I think has a value all of its own. So big thanks for watching. I'll see you for more GMG reviews. Thanks, Tom Ash. Operator. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continue to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.